Gators take on Texas on Saturday in Austin. Let's preview the game in tonight's episode presented by BetUS. Also, stick around because Meldon Law is partnering with us to do a giveaway for the LSU game, and I know that you want to know about it. Okay, we're going to jump right into this. I am here with Gerry Hamilton of On Texas Football. How are you doing tonight?
I'm doing great. It's gonna be a big week. Fun week. Texas coming off an off week. Florida coming off a big time rivalry game. So it's gonna be a good one in Austin.
I'm really excited for the trip. My husband and I are headed out there. Should be really fun. But let's talk big picture first before we get into this game a little bit. What has surprised you the most about the SEC? This is the first season, obviously, that Texas has been in the conference.
Well, Texas hasn't had as difficult schedule as an Oklahoma has, right? So Oklahoma had a really tough schedule thrown their way first year in the SEC. Texas really, road game wise, they have two rivalry games at Arkansas and at A&M. But so far, they've had at Vanderbilt on the road, and you get Georgia at home, you get Florida at home, you get Kentucky at home, and obviously Oklahoma is always neutral. So the first year schedule has been pretty good for Texas. But again, the biggest thing with the conference, and when I did this job nationally for ESPN and Under Armour for years, is, I travel in all those states, seeing all the top prospects and been to a lot of games in those stadiums, it's just the athleticism overall, the physicality, and just the test it provides week after week. It really does test your depth. But Texas, came in with the program in year 4 under Sark in a good place in that regard. They'd had 3 straight top 5 recruiting classes. They've done very well in the portal as a blue blood, as you should if you're a blue blood. So they're prepared depth-wise and strength-wise and size-wise for the move to the SEC. So I think they've been fine there. The biggest thing to me, again, is it's kind of staying up. You have to be up for every game in the SEC. I think that's the biggest thing. And I think that's the toughest thing, is especially if you're one of the top-ranked teams, right? It's that way everywhere, but it's different playing in Ames, Iowa, right? It's different playing against Kansas. It's just not the same. So I think Texas has shown themselves pretty well, but I'm here to say this 4-game stretch coming up is going to really define their season. I mean, the Georgia game, one game never defined your season, but these next 4 games are going to define the season, because you had the big win against Oklahoma in your rivalry game, but Oklahoma was terrible on offense. You had the big win early in the season at Michigan, who again struggled on offense this year. But now you're sitting there 7-1, and you have the playoffs, everything you want in front of you. You got to go 10-2 to get there, and you have 4 games coming up here against teams that are big and athletic. And I know Florida has a ton of injuries, and Florida and Kentucky have had rough years from an injury standpoint. But now it's all in front of Texas. But they're done with the off weeks. It's 4 games in a row in November.
I think it's interesting you point out the getting up each week, and I know that the SEC we talk about it just means more, and everybody else in college football thinks that that's kind of a myth, right? Or that it's not that it's that hard week in and week out. It's that we cannibalize each other and we think everybody's good. And, but it really is that hard. It really is that hard to get up each and every week. And, I think you can just look at y'all score against Vanderbilt. I think from the outside looking in, you think, oh, it's Vanderbilt. But for us within the SEC, we're like, all of these teams are tough, and we are just going into a battle week in and week out. And it's hard to explain until you're a part of it. But it is different than some of these other conferences.
No, it is. And Vanderbilt's an awesome one to talk about too. Because, okay, when you see a schedule, okay, Texas is good. Texas, Oklahoma game, Texas, Florida. Okay, Florida recruits. If they're playing, if Florida's going well, they recruit top 7 or 8 classes every year. If not, you recruit top 15 classes every year. So it's a talented roster. It's got about 20 or more future NFL players on it, right? But and same thing with A&M, a rivalry game at the end of the year. Kentucky's solid under Stoops. Obviously, Georgia's loaded, and those teams like that. But you look at what the portal it can do for the SEC too. Diego Pavia totally changed this team. Totally changed. Now, it's tight end Eli Stowers, a one-time A&M QB sign. He came with him. But That's the other thing about the SEC. And look, we're headed to two super conferences. I think one day we're going to have Big Ten and SEC, maybe have a third straggler power three, maybe conferences at that point in time. But the portal is very attractive in the SEC to really good players, such as a Diego Pavia, who wasn't highly recruited, goes to New Mexico State, leads them. Hugh Freeze hates him. Leads them to a great season, transfers in to Vanderbilt, and can totally change that team. That fan base has hope. Look what they've done this year.
Yeah.
So we talk about the high school recruiting, we talk about the blue bloods and the power programs of the SEC, but then you look at what the portal can provide. And if you do well in the portal at a Vanderbilt, suddenly you're immediately competitive in the league. You look at South Carolina. Look, that's a talented football team. And they're never going to be a team that probably ranks in the top 8 in the SEC. They did when Spurrier was there for a few years, but they're probably never going to rank in the top 8 in the SEC in recruiting rankings. But both of their edges are NFL players. The running back will play in the NFL. Their quarterback's going to be a heck of a college player. The safety may be a first, second round guy. So everywhere you go, there's big athletic guys, and they play a physical brand of football. And when you're big and you're fast and you hit hard, that's when depth is really tested over the course of the season.
Well, and I think that's something that's so different in the SEC too, is that you really have to have depth, because when November rolls around, you guys have beaten the crap out of each other for 10 weeks at this point, and there really is, you have to be able to survive those injuries. I know your first season isn't complete yet, and there's a lot of good games down the pipeline, but is there a matchup that you have enjoyed the most so far this season?
I think that one's coming up. It's A&M at the end of the season, because it's A&M Texas is one of the great rivalries in college football, but it went away for 12 years when A&M went to the SEC and Texas remained in the Big 12. But the level of vitriol that's going to come that week is going to be pretty crazy in the state of Texas. And the kids in this state, they don't understand it because they haven't grown up with it.
Right.
Even some of the younger college graduates from an A&M or Texas didn't really grow up with it. So they had kind of have an understanding from Texas OU, but they don't really have an understanding of what the return of a Texas versus Texas A&M game. I mean, look, you're part of it with a Florida State game, right? I mean, it's just different.
Yeah.
And now with a 12-team playoff, the crazy thing is if A&M or Texas doesn't really stub their toe down the stretch here, even if Texas loses a game, if both those teams go into that game 9-2,
yeah,
the winner's going to the playoff. Can you imagine the first time they play again in 12 years that the winner of that game goes to a playoff in that scenario? Or if Texas happens to be 10-1 and they're favored against Florida, but at Arkansas, they're favored against Arkansas, they're favored against Kentucky, but you're still going to go out and win a game.
Yep.
But imagine if Texas is 10-1 and A&M's 9-2, then Texas is sitting there and saying, we can beat you and keep you from being in the playoffs, and we get to celebrate going to the playoff on your field. That's a great rivalry game right there.
Yeah. What a welcome back for sure. Okay, so you mentioned earlier Texas coming off a bye, so I have kind of a two-parter here. How much do you think it helps them versus UF, who obviously is, coming off of that game against Georgia where they really did lose, a lot of guys to injury? And where do you think Texas is mentally after squeaking out a close game against Vanderbilt 2 weeks ago?
So they're a little healthier for Florida fans that maybe haven't followed Texas. Isaiah Bond, the best receiver, maybe the most talented receiver. I'm not sure he's best. They have 4 NFL receivers on that team. But the big play wide receiver didn't play against Vanderbilt. The Clemson safety, Andrew Makuba, who's been really good for Texas this year, he didn't play against Vanderbilt. So they're a little healthier this week. They've both practiced all week. So they're going to be as close to full strength as they can be. They've only lost one player since the season started for the year. That was Derek Williams, the sophomore safety. And then they lost C.J. Baxter, stud running back before the year. So Texas health-wise is actually pretty good going into this game, coming off an off week. What's interesting from a Texas standpoint, again, for the Florida fans that maybe don't keep up with Texas that much, is pass protection's been an issue. Georgia had 7 sacks. Vanderbilt had 4. Some of that's been on offensive line. Some of it's been running backs and pass pro. Some of it has been Quinn has not stepped up in the pocket and maybe shown reactive athleticism when the walls start closing in around them, which he's going to have to do at the next level. So I think getting that ironed out. And then the other thing for Texas, they've had a lot of undisciplined like penalties in the last few games. They've had a few turnovers as well, which, so they've really kind of self-inflicted wounds over the last few weeks. And they've still won with the exception of Georgia, and then that was not competitive in the first half because of the turnovers and miscues, and Georgia played really well defensively, had a great game plan. But so I think it's getting back on track offensively. Texas defense is really good, and they're not as talented as Georgia's defense as a whole. But they communicate. Their communication is really high level right now, and they are much improved in their secondary, tying it all together from a communication standpoint. So defensively, they're in a really good place. Offensively, they've got to get their rhythm back. They can't the holding penalties. The drive killer penalties, right? Maybe a late hit after a 9-yard gain on a run play against Vanderbilt, and then you get a late hit after it on an offensive lineman. It's 15 yards, and they still got a first down, but it still stalled their drive eventually, took the momentum away. The early interception, Texas had an interception in the first quarter on their own end of the field 3 games in a row. I mean, so that and an offensive line pass protection. So if Texas gets those things, if they start playing a cleaner brand of offensive football again, they're going to be really tough down the stretch.
All right. So one last question before I ask you kind of how Texas matches up with Florida and how you prepare for some aspects of our game. But I've been asking this to guests for over a year now. As an outsider, what is your perception of Billy Napier?
Yeah, so it's funny. I know Billy a little bit because he used to recruit in the state of Texas. So I'd maybe going through a high school, and he'd be there recruiting somebody, and I'd be there to see maybe the same kids when I was doing this job nationally. So I think Billy Napier's a great dude, and I think I think his kids are playing hard, right? And they've had some bad luck injuries this year. They're playing hard. I think they've done a pretty good job in evaluation. I mean, Ball's a tremendous freshman running back. Again, they made some good evaluation. I think young kids in the secondary, Aaron Gates, some guys like that. They've done a good job with those guys. So I look. He had the toughest schedule going into the season. Now it's changed because Florida State is. I'm sure you're enjoying 1-8, but Florida State's not what people thought they were going to be. But when I looked at it on paper, I was like, my gosh, he has the toughest schedule in America, maybe the toughest schedule I've ever seen. He had 11 Power 4 opponents on a schedule in a year where it's make or break for you. I mean, so that was a tough spot to be in. But the Derek Lagway injury is really unfortunate for him, and we'll see. Look, maybe he comes back and plays. That'd be a miraculous recovery from getting carted off. But maybe he comes back and plays. But they were starting, I think, to find a little identity. They had the QB run game. They're becoming tougher offense to stop, and they had the big play down the field. So I thought Billy was. I thought if Lagway stays healthy, and they didn't have all the injuries they had, maybe he had a chance to hit that 7-5, 8-4 type of season and start to turn the corner. It'll be interesting to see how this fares because Eugene Wilson, I think, is a stud player. I saw him in high school. I thought he was tremendous. So Jason Marshall, there's been some key injuries for Florida, but I think Billy is. Whether it works out or not, I think at Florida, I think the next 4 games are pretty much going to tell that story, right? But if it doesn't, he'll land on his feet.
Yeah. Okay. So on to this game. You mentioned that DJ Lagway injury. He was hurt against Georgia. What has been reported is a grade 2 hamstring strain. His status is questionable. How do you think Texas is approaching that uncertainty there?
Yeah, I think they prepare for both guys, right? I mean, in a way, because look, DJ Lagway was a kid who I think camped at Texas. I mean, Texas evaluated him. They're very familiar. Steve Sarkisian and AJ Milwee, they're very familiar with him. They evaluated him coming out of high school, so they pretty much know his skill set. I think Aiden Warner, because this was his first real playing time, that if an injury had happened against Texas, they would have brought in Aiden Warner, and they wouldn't have really known what to expect with him. So I think they're be prepared fine for both of those guys. If the interesting thing for me with the Florida offense is if Lagway can't go, what does Florida do? Do you see Wildcat? How how many tricks, how much do you see thrown at you? Because it's almost a game you have to throw the kitchen sink at a team if Lagway can't go, because you don't want to put it all on Warner's shoulders. He doesn't have that downfield arm, but Montrell Johnson, he suited out last week, but he's probably good to go this week, right? And offensive line's gotten better as the season's moved along. Run defense has gotten better as the season's moved along for Florida. So I think Texas will be prepared for both quarterbacks. But the one thing about it is if DJ Lagway, because he was a national 5-star QB recruit, every team he plays, they've all pretty much scouted him in high school. So there's not really unfamiliarity with the kid that was that good. Now, maybe he shows something on tape in college that you didn't see out of high school, but these schools are pretty familiar with him. I'll say that in his skill set.
So, we talked a little bit on before we went live here about we're both thinking he's probably not going to play.
Right.
But the injury report came out today, says he's questionable. He's not listed as out. There are several guys who were injured in the game against Georgia that are listed as out. And word out of practice from Napier is that he practiced today. We don't know to what extent or whatever. So, but what if he does play? How do they stack up against a quarterback who can move like he does?
So if he tried to give it a go, obviously he wouldn't move the same way he did prior to the injury. So, and you would have to protect him a little bit more in that scenario as well. So he becomes a pocket guy only, in my estimation. That'd be my opinion. I don't think they're going to be running zone read with him coming off of that injury. I think it's just that, okay, he's got a downfield arm. He's playing at a pretty high level for a young kid. So I think that would just he'd be a pocket guy, so it would change what he is against Texas, and maybe in the next couple of games as he tries to get back. So I think it would change dramatically what Florida's plan would be if he's healthy. I'll say that. So that would be my takeaway. But the big thing with DJ Lagway is, well, everything's with the jet sweep motion and then the play action. And what makes him really good and makes Florida's offense better is he has a downfield arm and he'll take the downfield shots, and he's pretty accurate throwing the football down the field. I saw him a couple times in high school. So that is a big piece for the Florida offense, especially with Eugene Wilson out for the year. I mean, the other two receivers, Badger and is it DK or is that the other one? Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, they have two of their top three guys, but it would be Lagway's downfield arm would be the difference. But I wouldn't expect much out of him as a runner against Texas. And I wouldn't, if I was coaching that game on the offensively for Florida and I just wanted to get him on the field, I wouldn't be taking risks. I wouldn't be running zone read with him.
So let's go to the other side of the ball. UF has been pretty good defensively recently. Really, after the bye week, it does feel like they sort of turned a corner. Not quite, Georgia level, but Texas hasn't been insanely good offensively recently. How do you think Texas stacks up offensively against that defense?
Yeah, so I'm interested to see what Florida does defensively against Texas. So Florida the last 2 weeks from what I've watched, and I haven't watched all 8 games this year, right? But against Kentucky and then against Georgia, they played a lot of too high shell with corners off. Well, that's when that's the bad matchup against Texas. Vanderbilt tried to do that, and Texas is really fast at wideout. The key to really getting after Texas for me, teams that have had the best success are you can play your too high and you can play your corners off, but you still got to get pressure at that point. Mm-hmm. Quinn Ewers is really good in the intermediate game. So the key there is if you're going to play a too high and you're going to play your corners off, one, Sark will hit the perimeter game and start bringing you down. Then he'll get into his longer developing plays where Quinn's really good in the intermediate game. If it's me, where Texas has struggled is A-gap linebacker blitzes the last couple of weeks. I expect Florida to do some of that. But I'm very interested to see how Florida comes out against Texas. 3 high safeties has worked the best against Texas traditionally and since Sark's been in Austin. But you have to have the personnel do that. I don't know where Florida's at with their injuries in the secondary. I mean, that's the key for me. I mean, is the too deep with your corners off pretty much what you can play due to injury? You may not have the personnel you had at the beginning of the year. So it'll be interesting to see how Florida plays Texas. I think that's the key. Florida up front's pretty good. They rotate a lot of guys. Florida has not been good. They've gotten better, but they haven't been good this season against the run. But the thing with Texas is with the loss of C.J. Baxter, Texas doesn't really have that downhill or inside zone run game that they had planned before the season. They've run a lot of outside zone, a lot of wide zone to take advantage of Trey Wisner and Jaden Blue. So I'm not sure the run game for Texas matches up with how, Kentucky ran a lot of counters and hit some counters early. I'm not sure that is where Texas has been successful this year, but they have run counter, so maybe you start to see that a little bit against Florida. But I think the key for Florida is, can they get pressure and still play that too deep behind it, the too deep shell behind it? You got to get pressure on Quinn in Texas. If not, the receivers, I mean, they have four NFL receivers, future NFL receivers they're playing. Their running backs are really good out of the backfield. Gunnar Helm's going to be a draft pick at tight end. Quinn's going to be a draft pick. They have speed all over the place in playmaking, and they have a quarterback that's really good in the intermediate game. So for Florida, it's imperative they get pressure on him and strip his timing.
It's going to be interesting for the Gators too, because Devin Moore is out. He's played really, really well. Dijon Johnson is questionable, so not sure what's going
He
to
had a
happen.
hamstring last week too. I noticed that against Georgia. Yeah.
So being down two DBs is definitely doesn't bode well for the Gators. But is there something that UF does that worries you?
That's a really good question. I would say they have gotten – so when I watched them early in the year, I didn't think Florida was going to be able to stop the run at all against anybody. And they've gotten better there. I think they've built a good rotation up front. So, look, I think they have the personnel to get pressure on Quinn if Austin Armstrong brings numbers, right? But if he brings numbers, then he's taking some risks with an injured secondary. So he's got a tough task. If he can get away with it with the secondary and they can get pressure on Quinn, that has been the formula for teams playing Texas this year. If you don't get pressure on him now, Texas will score 30 because they got such good weapons and Quinn's so accurate. So I think Florida defensively has improved. I think their front has good numbers of depth. I think their linebackers have played pretty well of late. So they've gotten better defensively as season's moved on, better against the run. I would say offensively, if it's Warner, I mean, they have that. Florida's in a tough spot against Texas if it's Warner. If it was a healthy DJ Lagway, though, that would give me a little pause with the QB run game stuff, the zone read stuff, all the misdirection off of that. The other thing I would say for Florida versus Texas has to tackle really well in this game because Jaden Ball, he may be a freshman at 6'1", 230. He's got some power. He knows when to drop his pads on contact. The guys kind of glance off of him at times. And then if Montrell Johnson plays, Florida's got two really good running backs, and they're different type of backs. But with Jaden Ball, Texas has to tackle really well. They've got to bring multiple helmets to that. A lot depends. I just think Florida, I think they're up against it if DJ Lagway can't play or if he's just a pocket guy and he can't really run in that game. I think they're up against it a little bit because Texas is pretty good on defense. They're really sound this year.
Don't sleep on Jackson either. We've actually got three really good running backs. So I think part of what's made Texas so successful so far in the SEC and this season is their trenches. They look like an SEC team.
Yes.
Can you talk to me a little bit about those units?
Yeah, from the Texas side, right? Defensive line wise, now Vernon Broughton, one of the starters, is out for the first half of the game. Number 45, he's had a really good senior year. He had a targeting call late where Vanderbilt scored that touchdown late against Texas. It was a fourth down play, I'm pretty sure, where Vernon got that targeting. But Texas defensive front their edges are the most improved position in the last 2 years at Texas under Steve Sarkisian. They have multiple guys who are going to play in the league. They're better at getting to the quarterback. They're better at even if it's not getting the quarterback to the ground, they're better at creating pressures. They're better at setting the edge. So the edge position's really improved. Interior D-line, I think, it's played better than maybe I expected it to. Alfred Collins has had his two best back-to-back games at Texas. He's probably a third, fourth-round draft pick level guy. Jermaine Lole, who's had serious injuries in his career, was a stud at Arizona State and thought to be like a first, second-round guy after his sophomore year. Then he had 3 injury-plagued seasons almost in a row, played at Louisville last year, transferred to Texas. He's a really good player. He's had a really good season. If he's healthy, he has an NFL draftable grade. So they're better up front, I think, on the interior than I thought they'd be. Linebackers, Anthony Hill's one of the best linebackers in the country. I mean, he's a future high NFL draft pick, first, second round level guy, playmaker. Leon Galafau, young linebacker in the middle. He really plays the run well, really good diagnoser. The corner, and Manny Muhammad 5 is a future NFL guy, first, second round level guy. He's really plays attached. Safeties have been improved. The communication's been improved. But in the trenches, the D lines play better on the interior than I thought they would. On the offensive line, look, Kelvin Banks, the left tackle, is a first round pick. The right tackle, even though this is his first year starting, he could be a first round, second round guy off his upside. So they're really good at tackle. Banks is a better athlete and often in pass pro than Cam Williams is. Cam Williams is really good in the run game at right tackle. Center Jake Majors has played a lot of football. Left guard Hayden Connor. It's a very experienced offensive line. Right guard DJ Campbell, second year starting. His backup Cole Hudson started his whole freshman year, then's had some injury issues. So Texas in the trenches, they can compete with anybody. And now Georgia got after their butt. Being real, Texas had some breakdowns in pass pro too. It wasn't just offensive line, but it was running backs, it was tight end. So it was a collective pass pro. But Texas offensive line is more than held up, I would say. They haven't had great weeks the last 2 weeks, and some of that's holding penalties, just bad penalties, right? But physically wise, when they come out on the football field, you're right. They look like an SEC team on the offensive and defensive line. And that's kind of what I hit on earlier. Steve Sarkisian had built this team to be ready to play in the SEC and compete in the SEC. But now offensive line wise, they have to play at a higher level these last 4 weeks than they have the last two. And not just offensive line, but pass protection in general. Backs, everybody. Quarterback has to play better in the pocket. But their trenches are ready to compete with anybody in the SEC.
Do you have an X factor in this game?
Yeah. Okay, so Texas is at home. They're favored, 17 and a half is what it is. I'm not sure I'd pick that. I'm thinking the 34-20, maybe 34-17 in that range, depending on if Lagway can give Florida something. X factor for me in this game for Texas is a first down run defense, I think is huge against Florida this week. Florida has to run the ball effectively. So first down run defense, if you can get Florida behind the chains, then you're in a pretty good spot, especially if it's Aiden Warner, because he's not an experienced quarterback. He didn't have the downfield, the big arm. So it changes what Florida wants to do. So first down run defense, offensive line, got to cut out the penalties, the self-inflicted, and the offense in general, the self-inflicted. An interception 3 games in a row in the first quarter, right? I mean, the turnovers, it's just the self-inflicted wounds offensively for Texas. So first down run defense for me, first down defense for Texas, and for on offense, it's just the self-inflicted. Texas has stopped themselves a lot the last 3-4 games, more than an opponent stopped them. And that happens sometimes. I'm not taking away from Georgia, but there's Mississippi State. They had a couple of bad turnovers. Oklahoma had some turnovers and miscues early. Vanderbilt didn't protection, broke down the second half, had some bad penalties, right? Stalled some drives, stalled momentum. So I think it's just playing a cleaner brand of football on offense. Defense is first down, run defense, first down defense.
All right, so you kind of hinted at it. You said 34-20, 34-17, something like that. So is that your pick, Texas 34-20?
Yeah, I'm going to go 34-17 is what I'm going to go. I'll believe DJ Lagway's going to effectively play when I see it. That would be odd when you get carted off, then you're on crutches, and you're ready to roll like nothing ever happened the next week with a hamstring. I don't think it works that way. So if he's limited, I think that it makes it tougher on Florida. But I think that I'm not saying it's going to be a blowout. I could see it being a late score, something like that. I think it's going to be a competitive game. I think there's going to be great energy in the game. I think it's going to be a physical game. Florida's got to make it a physical game. So I think it's going to be a really good football game with, with maybe 35, 40 future NFL players on the field.
Well, I, for one, am very excited to come to Austin. I'm very excited.
Have you ever been? Have you been before?
Oh,
you're going to love it.
To see the stadium, experience the town, doing all the things for sure. Thank you so much for coming on, Gerry.
Absolutely.
Everybody where they can find your work and follow you on social media.
Yeah, on Texas Football, YouTube or .com, either one. On Texas Football YouTube. Allie's been on with us before. Maybe we'll get her on again here coming up. But on Texas Football YouTube channel. I'm also on Twitter. I don't even know what my Twitter is. You don't want to follow me on Twitter. Just on Texas Football YouTube.
All right, Gerry, I appreciate you. Have a great evening, and I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you very much.
All right, guys, before we talk more about this game, I want to give BetUS some love. You can go to BetUS and bet on the game right now. BetUS has upped the game. Now you get a 150% deposit bonus when you use the code $1,000. Texas is currently a 3-score favorite right now, so if you like the Gators, go put a little money on it. Appreciate BetUS for their support. Go check them out. All right, guys. I'm checking out some of your comments. You guys really like Gerry. He's wonderful. He's so insightful. He knows so much about Texas football. I feel like I learn something every time that I speak to him. One of you told me I looked bored. Y'all, I stayed awake till 4 o'clock in the morning watching the election results come in. I am just dead tired. Also 5 kids. So let's talk a little bit more about this game, though, before we go. I was looking at Florida's winning probability for the rest of the season. Spoiler, not great. Right now, Florida has a 3.3% chance of beating Texas, which, that's the hardest remaining game on the schedule. So if we're looking for some positivity after this game, it should go up. The Gators are going to be favored against a really bad Florida State team at the end of the season. They've got a 55.6% chance of beating them. But LSU and Ole Miss sitting at 11%. So hard to find some hope on that schedule. But you know what? If DJ Lagway bounces back faster than, anybody's bounced back from a grade 2 hamstring injury, let's go, right? I do think the Gators have a shot in all 4 of the remaining games with DJ Lagway. Let's talk a little bit about key players in this game. Aiden Warner, if he's the guy, obviously all eyes are going to be on him. And whether or not Billy can craft a game plan that utilizes some of his strengths and doesn't put all of the pressure on him to win this game, allows him to be a game manager. Did see some reports of Jaden Baugh playing a lot of Wildcat in high school. That would be something I would totally be down to see. I don't know if you guys remember Trey Burton, in the times that we had to use him in the Wildcat. I'd be down to see if Jaden Baugh can repeat that. Got to figure out a way to run the ball, got to figure out a way to minimize mistakes, but still be able to score points. And my key player for Texas is Quinn Ewers for essentially all the reasons that Gerry talked about. If you look at what Florida was able to do to Carson Beck and Georgia, they got those interceptions. They had him flustered early. If Ewers has had some of the same struggles as Beck this year. I don't know to Beck's extent, but if the Gator D-line can get him on the ropes early and capitalize on a mistake or two, that could be where they're able to pick up some points, right? And keep this close. All right, so before I get to my keys for the game, I'm going to tell you guys that I really appreciate every time you join the lives, when you comment. I love interacting with you guys when you watch the videos, all of the things. I so appreciate all of the support you guys have given me on this channel. And I did recently start a Patreon, and that's a place that I've dropped little tidbits of information that I hear or find out about the program, or if I know about injuries ahead of time or recruiting or whatever. Monday, we posted about Wilson and Lagway. And then yesterday I got some pretty big recruiting news that involves a rival flip that I'm expecting to happen. Go check it out over at patreon.com/Allie Peak for that info. And if you'd like to support me over there, I would really, really, really appreciate it. But regardless, you guys are awesome. I love the community that you guys have helped build. I love interacting with you guys, and it makes this job really fun. Okay, so keys to the game. Got a few. Does Florida have a game plan that can produce any points? That's, we watched the Aiden Warner struggles against Georgia. And to be fair, he was able to move the ball a little bit. We did score some points. He also made some critical errors, especially that interception at the end. And it's because he doesn't have the experience, right? So can Napier craft a game plan that removes some of that pressure. I'm interested to see, but also puts up points. We can't continually go 3 and out and expect our defense to keep us in there if they're on the field constantly. My next key is, can Florida's defense carry the weight? Because even if we've got a game plan that can help us score some points, it's not the same as having a healthy DJ Lagway back there. So we are going to need the defense to kind of bear the brunt of this one. Not only stopping Texas, but maybe setting the offense up for some scoring opportunities, maybe taking advantage of an interception or a fumble or something like that. The defense is going to have to carry the day. And can they? And then, can Florida force Texas to make mistakes? This is kind of tied to the second key, right? Can they force yours to not be perfect? Florida is going to have to capitalize on mistakes if they want to win this one. And my last key is that Florida is going to have to play mistake-free football themselves. This is a really big order, right? An incredible task. And I don't know if it's something Florida is going to be able to pull off, but they are going to have to be close to perfect to win this one. I did have the injury report pulled up. I was going to run down it real quick with you guys. It's not great. Right now, we've got Jakeem Jackson out. Jason Marshall Jr. has been out. Wilson, we knew was out. Webb, we knew was out. Mertz, Turner, and Khalil Jackson. Devin Moore being out really does hurt. Devin Manuel on the offensive line is out as well. Jamari Lyons on the defensive line. And then we move to our questionable. Montreal Johnson's questionable again. He was last week as well. Didn't see him. Lagway is listed as questionable. Listen, I would love for him to be ready and to be able to play in his home state with his people in the stands. It's just a really tall ask. And if he's ready and he can do it, then let's go. But I also don't want to risk his career for a game that Florida has a 3% chance of winning anyway, right? Elijah Badger is listed as questionable. That hurts, especially with Wilson being out for the season. Dijon Johnson is listed as questionable. He's been playing well at DB. Damian George on the offensive line, who honestly, as of late, has come on. He's listed as questionable. And then, of course, Cam Jackson, who's been, kind of part of that heart and soul of the D-line, is also listed as questionable. If most of those guys, or even half of those guys, don't play, it's going to be a really long day for this Gator defense. All right, it's almost prediction time. But before we get there, I want to give some love to Meldon Law. We love them because of all the support they give us on this channel, but we also love them because of all the support they give to Gator Athletics. And now they're giving back to you guys. Right now, you can click on the link in the description of this video to enter to win tickets to the UF LSU game at the end of the year. You don't have to buy anything. You don't have to do anything. Just register there, enter to win the tickets. We really appreciate Meldon Law for their support and this giveaway, of course. Guys, they have great seats, so you are going to want to win these. And of course, if you're hurt or injured in a car accident, motorcycle accident, Uber, Lyft accident, give them a call. They have offices in Gainesville, Ocala, Lake City, and Fort Lauderdale. But make sure that you enter their giveaway because they're great seats and I want one of y'all to win them. All right, so it is time. I laughed when Gerry said 34-20 because that is actually what I have written on my piece of paper here is 34-20 Texas. This is going to be 2 weeks in a row where I've picked Florida's opponent to win, which almost never happens. I try to be the eternal optimist, and this is just a tall order. It was a tall order with a healthy DJ Lagway. It's a really tall order without him. I want to thank BetUS. And as a reminder, YouTube 150 gets you 150% deposit bonus on your first deposit and 125% on your next two. All of that up to $2,000. Don't forget to register for the Meldon Law giveaway. I want you to win those LSU tickets. I appreciate all of you guys. And as always, go Gators.